the US-Israel-Iran war will change the global economy and the world order. What do we have right now? We have a double blockade. The Iranians have blocked the Strait of Hormuz, and the US Navy has decided to blockade ships coming into Iranian ports. So it's now become an economic war of attrition. Negotiations are off and on. They are being held in that wonderful state of Pakistan, which of course is the Switzerland of negotiations. As we are all aware. Imran Khan is still in jail. Hey ho, there we go. It doesn't matter though. Field Marshal Asim Munir is Donald Trump's favorite field marshal, and we have negotiation ninjas like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner representing America in negotiations with wily Iranians. And so the facts on the ground are that we are in a frozen conflict as of now. Donald Trump has extended the ceasefire, but troop buildup continues. Israel continues to strike targets in in Lebanon, continues to strike Hezbollah targets. It has moved its troops up to the Litani River. And so, Glenn, over to you. What is the meaning of all of this? Where do you foresee this issue turning?
One's tempted to say that since the Iranians have a blockade, that Donald Trump wanted one himself, so he decided to blockade the blockade. But it is a measure of pressure, short of invasion and short of actually throwing in the towel and going home. Because Donald Trump has put himself in the United States and much of the world in a very awkward position. No one wants Iran to control the straits, and everyone is horrified at the prospect of, frankly, invading Iran. And so what does one do? It's a blockade of the blockade. It does increase pressure on Iran. But what's likely to happen? So all of us will have heard about the 15-point plan of the United States and the 10-point plan proposed by Iran, although no one has seen parts of these plans. But that doesn't really matter. And what we have seen through public statements and then the text of the proposals themselves is that these are opening gambits, and the fact that there was only one day of negotiation that then stopped, no one should really read too much into. Of course, you weren't going to end a war with unsolvable substantive problems and issues for both sides in a day, and negotiations never conclude until they must. So this is just an opening gambit. There will be a solution, and the truth is, it's, I think, relatively clear the broad makings of it. It's probably true that Iran cannot sustain for months the economic stresses that it is under, and the United States could, but politically cannot sustain the literal cost of supporting deployed forces in the region indefinitely. And the world, as you will talk about in a moment, Atul, economically certainly doesn't want to and should not have to sustain the progressive damage occurred by the closure of the straits. So a deal is probably likely, a solution, a resolution, not a solution, a resolution, which will resemble the agreement called JPCOA between the United States,
JCPOA,
European JPCOA. What did I say? Whatever.
JCPOA.
Yeah. Which is the nuclear agreement between the United States, other European powers, and Iran, which stopped really Iran's nuclear weapons development program allowed international inspectors to go to the relevant sites in Iran in exchange for some easing of sanctions and slow reintegration of Iran into the world economic order. I suspect that this is likely the direction that an agreement will reach, but probably inferior from the non-Iranian perspective to that which Donald Trump destroyed. And I would anticipate Iran will probably make some statement saying, yes, we pledge not to develop nuclear weapons for a period of time. We welcome inspectors, so long as they can affirm, even indirectly, the principle of Iran's right to have nuclear research conducted. And in exchange for that, the straits will open and matters will return more or less to the status quo ante the U.S.-Israeli attack, except that much of Iran's conventional military projection capabilities will have been destroyed. But they were not a threat before. There are only two ways that Iran could project its power before the attack, the war, and one was missiles. Half of the missiles have probably been destroyed in a lot of sites now, and one was through surrogates, and they've been severely damaged, not destroyed, but severely damaged by Israel. So that's the likely conclusion, because the alternatives are almost impossible to consider.
Glenn, I'm not so sure I entirely agree. I think the consequences, and let's begin with the economic consequences, are going to last much longer than the Trump administration. Number one, this is a supply side shock, which we have not seen since the 1970s. In fact, this month we had the annual World Bank IMF annual meetings here, and people said this is the biggest supply side shock ever. And the people saying this were some of the most seasoned investors and the most seasoned central bankers, and neither of these lot are particularly stupid or naive. And so what do we mean by supply side shock? Now, those of you listening to us, if you want a copy of our briefing, we have two briefings, one on the scenarios of the Iran war, and Glenn and I went through it in our last video, and two, which our managing partner Sanjay Acharya and our partner Manu Sharma have worked really hard, and they have a lot of brilliant ideas, and both of them are very sound quantitatively. They've crunched numbers. It's about how this will affect the resource architecture, the financial architecture, and the security architecture in years to come. And so rather than drowning you with data, which we could, let me paint you a very, very, very quick overview of what is happening. We know that the UAE has left, or it will be leaving, or is leaving, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, after almost 60 years. Now, on surface, this is not a big deal. The UAE was OPEC's fourth largest producer, 3.4 million barrels per day, 12% of the oil cartel's total production. In any case, the UAE was dissatisfied with Saudi Arabia, and OPEC was a cartel, and the breaking of that cartel is good news in the long run. But the important thing to note is that if the UAE has left OPEC, and that has considerable risks, then it means that the UAE was under tremendous strain. And obviously, the UAE is unhappy with OPEC's production quotas. It wants to pump more. Saudi Arabia, which is the informal leader, if not the formal leader of OPEC, wants UAE to pump less. Why? Because some Saudis need oil to be $80 to $100 per barrel to balance their books, whilst the Emiratis can make a profit at a lower price of $55 to $65 a barrel. Now, the budget or the budgetary situation of all Gulf, or nearly all Gulf states, isn't pretty right now. The blocking of the Strait of Hormuz has led to, number one, a lack of revenues through exporting oil and gas and petroleum products and industrial inputs, whether it is helium, whether it is sulfur, whether it is aluminium as well. So a lot of these commodities would go all the way to China and Japan and South Korea and Taiwan. That's not happening. So even semiconductor production is suffering, because guess who was supplying a lot of helium? Qatar. That's not happening. So there's a massive supply side shortage. Our industry sources in Asia tell us that forget about the financial prices, forget what you see on the screen, forget what you see on the ticker. The real prices they have to pay for physical delivery are a lot higher than the prices that are appearing on screens in financial markets. In fact, sometimes they are paying a premium of 20%. So spot delivery prices are 20% over prices in financial markets. Now, this is important because it shows the price mechanism of financial markets is now failing, because they are probably being driven more by algorithms, by considerations of interest rate rises or falls, and less by real world conditions. Anyway, that may be so, but the importance is that if you look at differential in prices across the world, jet fuel in Asia costs over $200 per barrel. This is about $40 higher than in North America. And as we said, the shortages of commodities is real. Look at the shortage of aluminium cans. You cannot buy Diet Pepsi in India anymore. Look at the shortages of cooking gas cylinders. Basically, LPG is used for cooking all across South Asia. Pakistan.
So the macro point is?
The macro point is that these countries have a massive shortage of supply, and inputs, so their outputs are going down. Because outputs are going down, you have inflation in the economy. Because you have inflation, you have demand destruction. And a lot of these countries will no longer be buying dollars. These dollars that they would buy were paid to Gulf countries for exports. The Gulf countries would then circulate it back into Western economies, in stock markets, in bond markets, in private equity, in venture capital, in investment in AI. So you could say that just as you have the Gulf Stream current that flows from the Gulf of Mexico northwards along the East Coast and then flows through Northern Europe, moderating everything, you had a Gulf Stream current in the financial world. And this time money flowed from the Persian Gulf. And now that Gulf Stream current has not just stopped, it is even reversing, even if temporarily. So the UAE has asked for dollar swap lines with the US. The UAE, of course, is betting more on the US and Israel as providers of security. But the important thing here is, instead of the flow of capital in the global economy coming from the Gulf, keeping asset prices up, now we have a reverse Gulf Stream, and there is real risk of contagion spreading from the real economy to financial markets, because whenever there is a disconnect, we believe that the real economy underlies the financial markets. Financial markets influence the real economy, but ultimately financial markets have to reflect the real economy. In the 2007-2008 crisis, we saw they were out of sync. Mortgages were going to ninjas, no income, no jobs, but the market was frothy in the run-up to 2007-2008. Markets are still frothy, and this correction is inevitable. And so economically, our arguments, the resource architecture now changes, and the financial architecture will change too. So the petrodollar, that will face a challenge. Iran is already charging toll in yuan, euros, and cryptocurrencies. India is buying Russian oil. Other people are buying Russian oil. They are not using the dollar anymore. They are using a mix of UAE dirhams, rubles, whatnot. So these are major tectonic shifts, and it'll be really difficult to bolt the gates after the horse has bolted. or so that is what we foresee. And just to give you some figures, the deficits of various countries range anything from 2.9 billion to 20.6 billion. And these Gulf countries run very generous welfare states, and they have been unable to cut down expenses in this crisis. So economically, this is a major event. And this will have implications for security too, because, as you said, the Europeans are now looking to have their own security. We have had Chancellor Friedrich Merz talk about America being embarrassed by Iran. We've had comments by Emmanuel Macron, French president. We've seen the sentiment in Europe. So increasingly, the Europeans will rely less on the US. As we talked earlier, is going to export arms. So the American security architecture, wherein everyone relied on America as providing global security as a global public good, and unfurling Pax Americana across the world, that will suffer. So we will see these massive tectonic shifts. And in the Gulf as well, we will see pressures. Bahrain is facing a lot of pressure. Bahrain is a Sunni dynasty ruling over a largely Shia population. We hear reports that members of its royal family are decamping with their assets to Europe. That is a signal. We hear intensifying relationship between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Pakistan could provide the soldiers for Gulf monarchies to keep their restive populations in control should a second Arab uprising emerge. So lots will change. Lots is changing. Over to you, Glenn, because you have a lot of predictions and you have some positive ones, particularly pertaining to green energy and nuclear energy.
Well, that could be the silver lining. If one has to, we must always look for a silver lining. So I think we can look at there will be some resolution to the current impasse between really the United States and Iran. And the straits will open again. Whatever the form that the solution negotiation takes in the end is frankly important as it is frankly secondary to the global changes that Atul was touching upon. Economically, it's a huge supply side shock, but it'll have lasting significance, not just on current economic activities and strains on each country's annual budget. The Gulf state economies will take lasting hits, and at best their growth rates will slow. If not, we will see them go into a relative tailspin that was otherwise completely avoidable.
Glenn, very quickly, if I can jump in, bankers and lawyers and all sorts of financial services providers in London and Singapore are very bullish that Dubai will never be the same again. As one person from Dubai, one investor from Dubai whom I met last week said that we thought we were Switzerland and we've discovered we are not. And so capital and talent is going to probably end up in London, despite the higher taxes and the political malaise. And of course, Singapore, because they are safer places to do business and the geopolitical risk of living and working in those places is much lower.
Right. Well, I would agree that I'll get to my cent and a half on that in just a second. But the one silver lining may be that the global transition to renewable energies, the turn away ultimately long-term, strategically, structurally, forever from petroleum-based energy will accelerate. And whereas projections by the IAEA and other, the UN and so on, have been looking to have renewables the dominant producer of electricity globally by 2035. The assessments now are, because of the fighting in the war and the blockage of the straits, that will accelerate by 5 or a half dozen years, which is really, really quite dramatic, which does not indicate good news for the Gulf states, since they all exist on oil. Globally, that would be a good thing to have happen, of course, and it will happen, and now probably more quickly. Strategically, to your point, Atul, yeah, well, what we're finding is it's tough to have Iran as a neighbor, and Singapore doesn't, and Switzerland doesn't, but the Gulf states do, and so they're in trouble now because of this. And Iran is coming out of this conflict with more influence in the region, actually, and globally, even through the threats to the straits, than it had before, which is a little ironic. But the United States seems to extend Iranian influence with each invasion of a Middle Eastern country. So it's a strategic loss.
Iraq was a godsend for Iran. I mean, you were involved in the war on terror. You know that part of the world well. That was fantastic for Iranian proxies to take over at least the Shia part of Iraq.
That's absolutely, absolutely. So it's a strategic loss for the United States, and that's, you can say, well, what does that even mean? Well, if Iran is more influential and you are hostile to Iran, and you are less influential, and other states are less inclined to follow your lead, then that has all sorts of ramifications economically, politically, and so on. The Iranian regime remains in power, and it's gone from being a theocracy run by the mullahs with strong influence by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards to fundamentally a garrison state, a military state run by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards with mullahs as, if not puppets, figureheads, which is not to anyone's interest except for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. So Iran
very quickly, if I can support your argument, the IRGC followed a mosaic strategy, decentralized control, and now the IRGC commanders are empowered. They have tasted blood. They have tasted real power in a military conflict. They are also now exercising powers of revenue by extorting ships or charging toll fees through or trying to charge toll fees from every ship passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is a very dangerous precedent, because let's say tomorrow Iran does become democratic, and when you have a democratically elected leader, as you do even in the US, taxing your own citizens is hard, but imposing tariffs or toll fees becomes easy. So whether tomorrow Iran's government is royalist or communist, democratic or theocratic, or indeed a garrison state, a term coined by our friend Ishtiaq Ahmed, the Pakistani author, academic, social scientist, historian, we will have Iran or Tehran seeking geopolitical rent from the Strait, and it puts into question the principle of freedom of navigation of the seas. It puts into question the entire rules-based order, freedom of trade, yada, yada, yada. So this has major consequences. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah, well, it's the realization in a specific place of what many of us, certainly I, have been talking about for years, which is the destruction of this normative order, rules-based order, and its replacement by regional power zones, which is not to anyone's benefit, certainly not globally. A strategic beneficiary, so the U.S. is a strategic loser in all of this. The strategic beneficiary is likely to be already China, because if nothing else, the acceleration of the transition to renewable energy sources and means of locomotion, as in EV cars, will be dramatically accelerated, and China dominates the market and is years ahead technologically of any rival, to their credit. And this will continue.
Chinese, just to add to that, Chinese solar panel companies, Chinese electric vehicle companies, Chinese battery companies, all of them are doing spectacularly well after this conflict. Demand for all of them have gone up. In fact, even in the US, Tesla's sales went up by 17% this quarter as compared to the same quarter last year. So this is a very good time for solar technology, battery technology, electric vehicles, and all that jazz.
One of the arguments by conservatives against electric vehicles has been that they cost so much. And there are two ways to look at this. One, the upfront cost has been higher initially for a purchaser of an EV than an equivalent internal combustion engine traditional car. Up to now, that's almost no longer the case. But the net expense of owning an EV is substantially less, and it has been for several years, substantially less than owning the equivalent internal combustion engine car. So now the economics are, frankly, more than compelling already to have an EV rather than a traditional car. So China will benefit. Militarily, because I don't want to go on too long here, well, once again, who's a big loser in this? And it's NATO. And it's not really because of anything Iran has done. It's because of what Donald Trump, as the president of the United States, has done. He's made alliances objects of insult only. And Europe has ridicule. Europe has quite clearly taken drawn its conclusions about the reliability of the United States and what it should do to meet its own existential issues. And so you see defense budgets going up, intra-European coordination increasing, arms production increasing, and agreements being discussed and implemented. So France is now extending its nuclear umbrella to Europe, as the United States had done for 75 years. So NATO is nearly torn apart. It will struggle to continue as an effective organization so long as the views of Donald Trump and his acolytes have much sway in the United States, which is possibly for the foreseeable future.
Very quickly, what is happening in NATO is mirrored in East Asia as well. The South Koreans, the Taiwanese, and the Japanese are talking together a lot more. They have been dismayed that the Asia pivot, which Barack Obama promised, never arrived. The US is yet again trapped in the Middle East. The US has withdrawn troops from Japan and indeed military equipment from the Far East, South Korea included, and sent it off to this war with Iran. So there is increasingly plunging confidence in American ability to come to the rescue of Taiwan or South Korea or Japan. And so Europe is saying out aloud what East Asians are saying in private. So the alliance structure of the US is under threat.
And thus we see part of the putting of proof is that Japan is now aggressively starting to develop once again its indigenous arms industry and sales. And then finally, the point I would make is that the consequences of this conflict really are the same ones that we are seeing in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is the clear primacy of drones and automated weaponry in warfare. They are not just ascendant but triumphant over heavy armor, over infantry. They give a strong advantage at present to defensive forces. In naval combat, the pride of America's military and the way it projects its power militarily is its aircraft carriers. I am not a naval expert, But to me, this indicates the decline of capital ships and naval warfare. If you can threaten a ship with a $20,000 drone, or maybe $20,000 drones, but the ship costs $6 or $12 billion and has 6,000 men aboard, and that ship has to now operate 1,500 kilometers away from the area that it seeks to influence. That's a revolution already in the warfare.
Glenn, so very quickly, I'll jump in. I'll jump in with a quote from our friends, engineers at MIT, who've worked on a lot of defense kit or military kit. They have said repeatedly that our equipment is brittle and expensive, and times may have moved on. So there has been a concern amongst engineers working on these extremely expensive systems that the US needs to be more nimble, and the US needs to have other technologies. And what you're saying about aircraft carriers is something they have talked about, almost everything from planes to radars.
Well, you can buy, these figures are pretty accurate. You can buy 50 drones that perform, say, at 80% of the capability of one Tomahawk missile for the price of one Tomahawk missile. So if your defenses are wonderful, 98% effective, you can destroy 49 of those 50 inferior drones, but you're still destroyed. And that's the dynamic that we are living now. So it's a revolution in military technology, and I think it implies a dramatic rise in the relative power of regional militaries at the expense of superpowers. It also should give pause to Beijing about trying to invade Taiwan, I would think. So the Iran attack by Donald Trump is turning out to be globally, historically significant.
So we can expect a new global economy and a changed world order. On that note, we will see you next month in May. Have a lovely start to your summer. Until then.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.